Which volcano in Iceland will erupt next? At a surface level, this seems like a fairly simple answer, the Reykjanes volcano. After all, it has erupted 4 times in 4 months, and there is no reason to suspect that it won't erupt a 5th time within the next 30 days. But suppose an eruption for some reason does not occur. Then, the next most likely volcano to erupt would be Fagradalsfjall, which has erupted once each year during 2021, 2022, and 2023. If this pattern holds, Fagradalsfjall could very well erupt again in 2024. However, to make this a more interesting mental exercise, let's completely remove those 2 volcanoes from the above question. With 32 other volcanoes to choose from, which do I think has the highest likelihood of being the next volcano to erupt in Iceland? Although there is no way to be sure in the long term, I wish to highlight 4 candidates. The first candidate is what I'm referring to as the Krysuvik volcano. During the infrequent episodes of greatly increased rifting on the Reykjanes Peninsula, several volcanoes erupt at a high rate in a several decade to several century long time span. There is usually a definable center of activity when this occurs, which gets less and less active the further you get from the center. This very pattern can be seen during the current ongoing rifting phase, which is seemingly centered in the eastern section of the Reykjanes volcano. On the eastern periphery of the ongoing rifting is the Krysuvik volcano, which as a result of this activity produced a single magmatic intrusion that failed to reach the surface during October of 2020. Krysuvik has also been the site of 3 definably magmatic earthquake storms since the beginning of 2020 and has regularly produced a surprisingly high number of earthquakes west of Lake Grimsvotn. However, there is not yet any reason to suspect that fresh magma is present under Krysuvik, and due to the number of sensors on this complex, we would know if uplift was occurring there. This is why Krysuvik is the known. Towards the west, the closest volcano to one which has produced an eruption during the current phase is Eldey. Eldey has produced slightly less but still fairly numerous earthquakes since 2020. However, we don't have the ability to measure underwater ground deformation, and most sensors are too distant to detect any magmatic-caused tremors if one was to occur. Eldey could technically be in an unrest state right now, and we probably wouldn't know about it. Eldey, during the last major rifting episode on the Reykjanes Peninsula, produced an eruption around the same exact time one of the Reykjanes volcano's eruptions occurred. I am classifying Eldey as an unknown due to our lack of an ability to accurately monitor this volcano. Third, we have the statistically most likely volcano, Grimsvotn. Grimsvotn is by far the historically most active volcano in Iceland, having erupted a whopping 70 times since Iceland was settled. Its rate of eruptions has averaged once every 15 years, and it has been 13 years since its last eruption. And, what do you know, one scientific model suggests that Grimsvotn has already surpassed a threshold that signals an increased likelihood of an eruption occurring. As a result, Grimsvotn, if the model is to be believed, can be classified as overdue for an eruption. However, there is no reason to suggest that any significant volcanic unrest currently is ongoing at Grimsvotn. It just simply represents the most likely volcano in Iceland to experience a heightened episode of unrest, in my opinion, outside of the Reykjanes Peninsula. My 4th option is the wildcard known as Hekla. Hekla is the 3rd most active volcano in all of Iceland, with 25 eruptions during the last 1,000 years. Hekla, much like Grimsvotn, is also considered overdue for an eruption, as between 1970 and 2000 it erupted at least once a decade. Long-term uplift all the way back in 2006 surpassed the levels Hekla reached before its 2000 eruption, and yet no eruption has occurred since then. While there are currently no signs that Hekla is experiencing a heightened level of unrest, this volcano has a unique quality which makes it a wild card. Simply put, all of Hekla's eruptions only produce signals that warn of an imminent eruption between 23 and 80 minutes before it occurs, with absolutely no unusual activity before this period. This short notice occurred during its last 4 eruptions, hence why many warning signs placed around Hekla ask people to always turn cellular data on when they are near this volcano. Thus, Hekla could hypothetically erupt at any time, and we would not potentially know about it until as little as 20 minutes beforehand. Which of these would you pick? Be sure to comment down below, and feel free to pick one of the 28 other Icelandic volcanoes which I did not mention. There is no right or wrong answer. We cannot predict volcanoes long term, so I think this will be a fun exercise to display the unique nature of Icelandic volcanoes along with the extent plus limitations of the current science of volcanology.